Welcome everyone to this special evening that we have planned for you. This is our first film club for 2022 as part of the 5-Minute Film Festival series of events. My name is Kahan. I am the client experience specialist for technology at Pickering Public Library. I'm joined alongside Shaheen. Shaheen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shaheen. I am the events coordinator for the Pickering Public Library.
Yes. So this evening's workshop is kind of a celebration of the life of Sidney Poitier as part of, in support of Black History Month. February is Black History Month. So Mr. Poitier recently passed away, I believe, in February. So we wanted to do something special because he was a very pioneering person, not only as far as film is concerned. He was part of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So a wonderful human being. So we wanted to celebrate his life a little bit. So that's what we're here for tonight. So I want to introduce. We have two co-hosts that are going to be basically taking over this session. So we have Romina Diaz and Chris Dodson. So hello, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to remove my spotlight. Hold on. Shaheen, are you able to remove spotlight? Oh no, I could do it. Here we go. And I will spotlight you guys.
All right.
Yeah, for some reason it's not spotlighting. Shaheen, are you able to do that?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, there we go. All right.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So yeah, we're gonna be sharing our screen here in a moment because we have a presentation about the film that we watched and also about Sidney Poitier. So yeah, we just wanted to give a brief introduction to the film that we watched. It was Paris Blues.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and start. Give me 1 second here and I'll get my screen up for you all.
And if the participants want to, do you want them to unmute now, Chris, or do you want to hold off for the unmuting?
Whenever they feel like it, I think is probably fair.
Perfect.
Because we're kind of go back and forth between like talking about like our impressions and then hearing other people's thoughts and just kind of go through things.
Yeah. We hope that everyone feels comfortable to like interject at any time. Obviously, like maybe use the chat if you have something to say. But we will also like include questions so that you have a time to speak what's on your mind.
Yeah. All right. So like I said, we started this with Paris Blues, which was released in 1961. And it was about two jazz musicians in France who kind of start their own romances with some American visitors in France. And they're both confronted with a decision to make about whether or not they want to return to the United States of America or stay in France to continue pursuing their musical interests.
Yeah, and the lead actors, Paul Newman plays Ram Bowen, Sidney Poitier plays Eddie Cook, and we also have Lillian. Oh yeah, here are the actors. Joanne Woodward plays Lillian Corning. Diane Carroll plays Connie Lamson. Sarah J. Reggiani plays Michelle the Gypsy. And Louis Armstrong as Wild Man Moore. So,
right.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Our impressions of the film. So we have a few points that we want to go over. I'm going to go to the first.
Okay.
So our first impression was we felt conflicted regarding the contradictory beliefs and mentalities on display. So we felt that the film both romanticized and demonized artists and France. They paint France as this magical, romantic place where people are more open-minded, and they paint artists as free expressionists while at the same time criticizing them for the same reasons. During the start of the film, the main characters state their love for France and the mentality of the people in it. The two women, Lillian and Connie, fall in love with the two musicians during their vacation in France, but they will soon have to return home to the USA. The message I took from this aspect of the film was that love, romance, art, and tolerance are okay, but just for a short amount of time, for a vacation. Then one has to come back to reality and face the harsh truth that is waiting in the USA. So how do you feel that the filmmakers portrayed artists and France in the film? If anyone wants to contribute a thought.
Comment.
Yeah, comment.
I mean, I could talk a little bit. I totally agreed with your points on how the filmmakers both romanticized and sort of painted France and the pursuits of like artistic expression and artistic endeavors as both romantic but also sort of irresponsible. Thought it was interesting, obviously coming from, we think of filmmakers as artists, and I thought that was very strange. It kind of struck me as unusual for filmmakers to be kind of like straddling a line of like what their impression was or what they kind of believed to be the values that they wanted to talk about in the film. And yeah, that was my impression. I totally understand that and found it very just unusual and a little contradictory.
Yeah. There was also a strong emphasis on confrontation versus running away, especially with Sidney Poitier's character Eddie Cook and Paul Newman's character Ram Bowen. With Eddie Cook, the emphasis was placed on race and racial prejudice. So Connie asks Eddie why he stayed in France and away from his home. Eddie replies that he feels more comfortable in France because he's not met with the same hostility as in the USA. Connie gets upset because of her love interest in wanting to stay with Eddie and have him move back to the USA with her. So
actually, Romina, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
The one I actually wrote down this quote. It was at the 44-minute mark. I actually wrote it down. So for those of you who want to kind of go back and look at that, they were walking, I think, by the river in that scene, right? And then she asked him that question, and then he goes, I'm a musician in Paris, not a Black musician in Paris. So I found that very interesting. So that's why I time coded it. So it kind of goes along with what you were just saying a moment ago.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point to rise, because later on when we'll be talking about Sidney Poitier's career and his involvement in like social rights activism, and it's such an interesting kind of snippet into his mentality in that moment that you pointed out, and it's very interestingly like represented through his works and also through his interactions with the press and so forth. And we'll talk more about it later, but I'm glad you pointed that out.
So she accuses him of essentially being afraid and urges him to like not run away from his problems by settling in France, but instead confronting like the racial terrors that await him in the US. So I was just wondering what everyone feels the impression on the conflict of like confrontation versus running away. Like, did you find this to be true, and also maybe did you like agree with her point of view, with Connie's point of view of Eddie potentially running away and being afraid instead of confronting like what he needs to confront?
Mhm.
Does anyone want to jump in? Deborah, Jerry?
Oh,
Hey
we talk.
guys.
We
Hi.
talk.
Yeah.
We
How are you
talk
guys
about
doing?
this. Good, thanks.
Yeah.
It was one of the things that struck us, which was that she was so vehement with her beliefs about that there was a battle to be fought, that they needed to go home and needed to confront the issues at home, and that he was somehow, just avoiding that or living in this idyllic world, but it wasn't reality of the situation in the world. And so, but I also felt, when we heard her talk versus him, this was something that was important to her because of the way that I think she felt about her culture, about being Black in America, and that this was a life and a world that she knew, and she embraced the struggle, and that he was sort of somehow just avoiding it. And I think that was a big value differentiation for both of them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's very
But
true.
also I thought that the struggles of, was the character's name Connie? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. That
It's
I always think of her as
7:15.
Diane Carroll because I've long been a fan. But
Hmm.
with the character of Connie, she seemed a bit bewildered by the fact that there's no discrimination. She seemed very uncomfortable with the fact that a white man was taking interest in her, and that everywhere she looked, she was seeing the race thing, but was confused because no one else was getting that part, that they should see the race thing. And she saw it everywhere, but they didn't. And it caused her a great deal of bewilderment.
Mhm.
So isn't Paris mindset the ideal? To not
Exactly.
see the color, to not see the race? We're just people here. We're just musicians. I am Eddie the musician. I'm not Eddie the Black magician.
Musician.
Musician. I
Yeah.
have a hard time with those
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be magic if we could do that?
And actually, Deborah, because from what I recall, it was Paul Newman's character that first met her,
Yeah.
like
Yes.
on the train. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that kind of goes to your point.
Yeah.
The other thing, Romina, you asked like a few minutes ago about the romanticization of Paris and all that. I
Right.
felt like in this movie, Paul Newman's character was more of the romantic. He had more of that romantic, I'm a musician and I can strive in Paris and all of this. Whereas with Sidney Poitier's character, I felt totally like he was there, not so much for the romanticization of it, but just to escape the racism that he was experiencing back home. So I think, they're both musicians, but they were both in Paris for two totally different reasons.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know.
true.
Yeah. Eddie Cook definitely had a more practical kind of approach to being in France, and for his being there was, he even says right out in one of the first scenes of the film that, he works with Ram because Ram can draw an audience. Ram can get him more attention. And that is a very practical way to look at it, and a very practical way to approach that lifestyle.
Yeah, even when
For
he
sure.
was
And
he was on the
I
on the
totally
bridge.
agree with, sorry, was it Deborah?
Sorry, Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll let Jerry
Yeah,
talk.
right.
Oh, so I was just saying, even when he was on the bridge with, kind of,
Are we losing connection?
There we go.
well,
Yeah, sorry, we're having a little bit of a spotty connection here, but yeah.
okay. Well, just my point was that, he was trying to woo her. And so he took her on the bridge behind, with Notre Dame behind, and it almost seemed like secondary thing to him. It was like a prop.
Mhm.
Mm.
What did you say?
Yeah, I was going to say that I completely agree with, was your name Deborah? Sorry,
Yes.
oh, yeah.
Deborah,
With,
yes.
yeah, with your point about how Connie seemed stunned and like almost like not accepting of the ideal or like what she's technically working towards.
Yeah.
And that fascinates me on like a psychological level, but also I thought maybe the reason could be because she wasn't the one that helped get there. Like she didn't see the evolution to the end goal of like being a utopia. So maybe she was just missing that part, and that's why there was like the confusion of like, well, no, we didn't, I didn't go through that period of like
Transition.
seeing, right, transition, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's-
Because she didn't experience a transition. How could we be there all of a sudden?
Yeah.
It was too much for her to realize that maybe what she's experienced in her vacation was the end result, that the ideal America that she was looking for. She wasn't
Mm,
comfortable there without taking the steps.
right.
And
And-
she's so used to being I hesitate to say, but the us and them
Yeah.
theology of us, my family, and them,
Yes.
all the people that are against my family and my people, all of a sudden, all that's gone. And
Yep.
it must have been very confusing for her.
I think she embraces the struggle. Like the struggle means something to her.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I think that's why she probably wanted to go back home so urgently, because like maybe she needed to make all that make sense somehow, or maybe she just wanted to go back to where she was comfortable or what she knew.
Yeah, what was familiar for her.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next slide, or-
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So another thought that we had, or another impression that we had of the film, that we found the characterization was the most engaging and intriguing aspect of the film for us. For example, Eddie Cook is characterized as caring, artistic, patient, suave, and as a stable man, which is kind of contradicted by Ram Bowen's character, who is almost the opposite. He's an unstable, insecure artist. He's promiscuous, non-committal, very self-serving and ambitious. And we kind of get the same sort of duality in the characterizations from Lillian and Connie's characters, where Connie's characterized as intelligent and aware, patriotic, action motivated, and Lillian is more spontaneous, kind of dreamy, a little bit more giddy and silly in some ways. And we found that Connie and Ram surprisingly have similar approaches in life, where there was a tension between Ram and Eddie as musicians, as well as friends, as well as with Connie and Eddie as lovers. They have like these different perspectives and approaches to life, where Ram and Connie seem to be ambitious and motivated to go after what they want, even if it means leaving a potential love interest behind. Eddie is a bit more reactive and passive, and is mostly satisfied with where he is and what he has for himself already, whereas Ram and Connie are not. And we thought that kind of that contradiction in their characterizations was very interesting and engaging to us.
Mhm.
You want to talk more?
Yeah, and we were wondering, were there any attributes that you think that we did not mention? Like, did you find any attributes in the characters that stood out to you, and maybe that helped maybe move the story forward, that were really important?
Besides what we already talked about.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm thinking about the other character, and I don't remember his name, the one that was on some kind of drugs or something.
Michelle,
he just-
he was known as
Michelle, the
Gypsy.
gypsy.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
escaped everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
But wasn't he a good actor? He was convincing.
Oh yeah.
Yes, he was.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and speaking of the actors, Sidney Poitier and Diane Carroll were so much obviously better actors than Paul Newman or his wife, Joanne Woodward. They were just so natural. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I've never been a big Paul Newman fan anyway, but you know, I haven't seen a Sidney Poitier movie for years, and I really appreciated how much better he is than a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very
And,
captivating.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's true.
But the characterization, what else?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out who I identified with, and it was very hard to do that with the characters that were there. As I said,
Yeah.
like Deborah said, I felt that Diane and Sydney's they lit up the screen when they were on it. I'm not going to say this, lightly, but they were much more attractive people. They were much more attractive actors.
Yeah.
Their scenes together were, there was like you said, an energy to them. Whereas I just felt, the other scenes, kind of dragged, with Paul and Joanne. And so I, as I said, I was very surprised at that, given the pedigrees of all the actors.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting too, the relationship that Ram had with, I don't recall her name. Like it seemed
Yeah.
like the lady that owned the place.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
French
Yeah,
singer.
the French singer, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
how they had a relationship that was actually more interesting than his relationship with is it Lillian, Joanne Woodward character?
I
Sorry,
forget the
There
what
seemed
was,
to
character's
be
what
name.
was
more
that?
workable. What was that?
Sorry, we lost connection for a brief moment there.
Oh, yeah.
What were you saying about
I
Lillian?
was saying the relationship between Ram and the French singer.
Hmm.
Their
Yeah.
relationship seemed more real to me than this little fantasy flight that he took with the Joanne Woodward character. Is it Lillian?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. And I think it
Yeah.
might be because like they knew each other like more intimately because it was like their everyday lives, while
Mhm.
Lillian, she just kind of came like all of a sudden
Mhm.
out of nowhere, and yeah, it was more like a fantasy.
I felt the codependency too between Ram Bowen's character and the singer who owned the cafe. Kind of,
Yeah.
it felt more real than what was happening between Lillian and Ram.
Right.
Because that like we get that same sense of like dependency from like Ram trying to keep people around him because he feels like he needs them to be able to achieve the things he wants, and that felt like a natural extension to that.
Right.
Mhm.
But he pushed them both away.
Mhm.
Like he didn't want to be with the woman that he would like see every day, like when he was practicing music. But at the same time, like at first he wanted to be with Lillian, but then she kind of expressed like more desire for like more than just a fling, and then he was like, oh no, like no, not my thing.
Yeah.
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 It was. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems like he did not want the involvement. That would be extra things to do, and he just wanted to focus on his music,
Right.
or so he
Yeah.
said.
Exactly.
But wasn't it interesting when he got to the point where the fella that could help him said that, well, maybe you're not so good, maybe you need more training. He didn't jump on that and says, well, give me more training.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He more or less
Yeah.
shut down everything.
That's
And
true.
then went back to the girl as if
Yeah.
she was what, a reason perhaps to give
Yeah.
up everything.
Right.
Yeah, why did he give it up so easily after all that fight? His character was very confusing to me. He wanted it so bad, and yet when he was sitting in the chair, he had nothing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that was one of the like to me, because of that strain, like that oddity about his character was kind of compelling to me, because found myself constantly trying to figure out like why his character had these kind of strange, almost self-sabotaging tendencies, but also kind of like a need to keep pushing himself. It was a very strange kind of like a contradictive nature to him that I found curious, and like that was one of the reasons why I found his character interesting, was because he was so hard to pin down and hard to understand fully.
Yeah. Well, maybe this movie, actually, maybe we're missing something too, is everyone there had conflicts.
Mhm.
Right.
We had, the Ram with conflicts within himself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We had the drugged character of, he had conflicts with everything.
Yeah.
We had Connie from the States, who had a conflict between races, or so she thought, and a conflict with her goal. And when she actually saw it in action, she
Mhm.
felt
Right.
uncomfortable. So maybe she wanted the conflict.
Mhm.
And Sidney Poitier in conflict with his homeland, where he
Yeah.
grew up and ran away from. And he was the only one that was no longer in conflict.
Yeah.
And yet he was going to be drawn back into it because of Connie. So then he was brought back into conflict.
Yeah.
The one other thing that I found very interesting was their personalities. Like, I felt that Sidney Poitier's character, he was so much more confident than Paul Newman,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Remember that one scene where, Paul was he passed Sidney's character, Eddie, I think the character's name. I'm forgetting
Yeah.
the names. The piece of music and all that, and he goes, "What? You don't like it?" Like,
Yeah.
Paul's character had this persistent kind of sense of insecurity, I felt.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
he was insecure about everything. And then, like, when he had that meeting with that executive, right, and then the executive shoots him down, basically saying, well, it's good, you're good, but you're not good enough, sort of thing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So there was always that kind of that feeling, that sense that Paul's character was so insecure about everything,
Right.
including his relationship with oh God, I forget her name.
Lily?
No,
Connie or Lillian?
Lillian.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, no, those are all like very good points that we were thinking about while we were kind of breaking down the film and trying to pinpoint what we wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were actually going to bring up what you said, Deborah. Sure. Yeah. About what was it? I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, if it wasn't really like Eddie's conflict,
Mhm.
because I also identified with that thought. Like, I was like, Eddie seems fine in France. Like, he's great. And then Connie comes and she's like, no, you have a problem. Like, you're running away. She like frames it as if like that's his problem. But I didn't get that, like, when it was just him, when we were introduced to him, he was just a musician, like he was having a good time. And then she's like, no, you're running away. So I was wondering, like, do you believe that that's actually like his conflict, or was she just like projecting that on him? And
Yeah.
like, did he make a good decision? Like,
I think
unfortunately,
I think that was her insecurity, right? Because I think there was an earlier point made that because was in Paris for so many more years, right? I think he
Yeah.
was there for like 5 or 6 years, right? I felt like for Eddie, things were more kind of clear cut, simple.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm a musician in Paris. I'm not a black musician in Paris. Done. You know what I mean? Whereas she came in and then she kept injecting all of these social injustices and stuff like that, because that's all she knew, right? Because
right.
she was just in Paris on vacation, and here she met, this wonderful black musician, but he didn't portray himself as that. Am I kind of making sense with?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
Makes
completely.
sense. I thought it was also interesting that the Connie character went on vacation with a white girl. And that was never explained.
Yeah.
For someone who was so within her own culture,
That's
is,
true.
like, I don't remember so Connie was a teacher, I believe. What was Lillian? Did we ever find out?
She was a housewife, I
She was
think,
a housewife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Yeah, where her
How
husband
did these-
recently died,
Divorced
like she
widowed.
widowed.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Is it
Yeah.
divorced or
Widowed.
Widowed. It was
Yeah.
widowed.
I
Okay.
think widowed. I think she said
Yeah.
her dad died,
Yeah.
or her husband died.
So how are those two buds?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wondering.
Yeah, Phyllis is their friends.
Yeah. Definitely some missing pieces.
Yeah.
Strange thing. Yeah.
But I find this all very fascinating because partly because I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, right across from Detroit, and I was there during the riots and stuff like that. And in my school, we had 3 families that today I would consider non-white, but it was interesting that these were my friends, and I never really thought about it at the time. But it's because they were from different parts of the world, that their families were from different parts of the world, that I was most interested in them because they were different from everybody else.
Right.
You know, there was an Asian girl that was, her dad was he owned a Chinese restaurant in town. And there was, you know, a Blackfoot Indian girl. And there was oh yeah, and when I was a teen, there was a Black family that moved into town, and he became a star of our school in that we had a cheerleading team, and he came in and he started a scream team that was all guy cheerleaders.
Oh, cool.
And we were all fascinated with these people.
Right.
And yet across the river, they were having all these race wars. And I didn't really get that. I wasn't living in amongst it, although we could hear the gunfire and stuff when the riots were going on. We're a mile away across the river. So I don't really understand enough about the race conflict. When I see the things that happen, I'm looking at what was his name? Rodney King, who, you know, who took harm at the police. I'm going, someone took harm at the police. Whereas other people are seeing the race issue. I'm saying, well, why aren't we all upset about this? Everybody should be upset at people taking harm from the police. You know, it's a bit confusing to me. I try to keep an open mind. And so Paris, I think, represented to me the ideal of the way that we should be. We shouldn't be going, oh, look at they're Black. Oh, look at they're white. We should be going, oh, look what happened. That's an injustice.
Right.
But we keep, as the Connie character kept pointing out, but it's a race thing. It's a race thing. Maybe it's not always that. Maybe we're looking for it too much. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's true. What you say also parallels with Poitier's like ideologies in life, because he would consistently get angered by what do they call them? The reporters who would ask him questions like solely about his race and like nothing about like his acting experiences or his characters or the story. So he'd always like reply with like, I am more than just like my race, like what you see, like I'm a human being. And it was noted in several interviews and articles that he would pick roles based off of like their humanity. And he would try not to fall into like the stereotypes of Black people. And yeah, so that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Another point we had was it felt at odds with current socio-political ideologies. So we were already discussing how I didn't agree with Connie's perspective on Eddie running away. And I thought it compared to today's idea of how BIPOC are consistently faced with oppressions and prejudice, and they face like the negative effects through stress responses, which negatively affect their physiology and their mental health. And this is known as racial battle fatigue. So I feel like nowadays people don't want to put the onus on just one person to solve an international problem such as like race. So I feel like now we're more aware and consider how it negatively impacts people on a day-to-day basis. How they're like, if there is let's say colored people who are always confronted daily with like microaggressions or abuse, just abusive behavior, it becomes really exhausting, and they can't function like regularly, just as like a non-colored person would, because they don't face the same barriers with race. So at the same time, Poitier was idealized and put on a pedestal since being the only Black man in Hollywood. He became the face that represented all Black people in America. And it's fascinating to see the parallels in Paris Blues with Poitier's character, Eddie, and with Poitier in real life. As I said before, in an interview with Oprah in the 2000s, Poitier said he accepted the responsibility put on him to represent Black people in the mainstream mass media. And I believe that that was a very heavy burden to carry alone. And of course, Poitier was not completely alone, as he had producers, directors, and other actors to support him in the roles that he managed to get. Yeah, and I have a question here. Like watching the film today, did you find any conflicting messages that are addressed differently in today's culture? Maybe like in terms of racial issues, particularly.
Does anyone else have a thought? Rivette, there
Sorry.
you go.
Yeah, hi. Sorry,
Hi.
I for joining late.
No problem.
I actually, I loved the movie. It was great. I've seen a few of Sidney Poitier's films. I think this one I did miss though for some reason, or if I watched it, I'd forgotten about it. So I watched it on the weekend. I think you may have already touched on this. The fact that the movie is set in France, I think, lends a completely different lens to it. It could also have maybe been set in a few other countries around the world as well, where this may not have been the issue that it was set maybe in North America.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. It was interesting for me that the movie when Paul Newman's character actually is interested in Diane Carroll's character, and and then it just, can you just imagine if they had gone down that path? Then I don't know whether that would have even gone past.
Right.
I don't know what was acceptable. Like, let's speak. I'm pretty sure the miscegenation laws in the U.S. had not even, I think, been lifted at that point.
Let's keep in mind too that the film was in 1961.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a
Yeah.
very interesting point, Rivette, that you bring up, right? Because yes, it's true. What you were just saying a moment ago, Newman's character did meet Diane Carroll, or what's her name
Yes,
again?
Connie.
Connie.
was- yeah.
My God, I'm
Yeah.
terrible with names.
Me too.
Yeah. But sorry, Rivette, did you have more to add to the point?
No, that was it. It was just, I think to Romina's question is like, how would things be done differently today, or are we still? It is. I think in the last couple of years, we are seeing more, I'll say, biracial, multiracial relationships being on TV and in the movies, but it's not mainstream. It's probably true in the last 5 years or so. But even if you go to some of the early 90s, and even like I don't think there were a lot of movies. The only one I can think of is Mississippi Masala with oh dear, what's his name? Denzel Washington and Sarita Chaudhry, like an Indian and a Black. That was, I think, in the 1990s or something. But hard to find that. Like hard to find.
Yeah.
And maybe now it's getting better.
That's true.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up too, because we have a mention for later about Sidney Poitier's. He was actually, I think, in the first film to represent an interracial couple that didn't end in tragedy or poorly.
Yeah.
And that, I think that was what, 6 years after Paris Blues? I think it was 1967, right? Or
Yeah, either.
Do you
64
know
or
the name of
67, and
what's
Guess
the
Who's
name of the
Coming to
film,
Dinner?
Chris? Do you remember?
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Which is the film I think he's most known for. That's the
Yeah.
film.
Right, it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
popular.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know that one was later on in his career. I think it was the same decade, the 60s,
Yeah.
but that was it's interesting that you bring that up because like even a few years later, they were willing to take a risk like that. And that actor, Sidney Poitier would be like the choice for that, because he already, and like within the mainstream audiences, he kind of already situated himself, or not even situated himself, but had been placed in that kind of position to be capable of holding a kind of story like that without people really reacting negatively to it, I
Right.
would think.
He was like widely accepted by
Yeah.
mass audiences. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can I touch
So-
upon a few points? So with regards to the whole race issue. So as I said a few moments ago, so the film was made in 1961. So
Yeah.
we really need to put things into perspective, right? So I
Yeah.
actually looked this up today. The March on Washington, which I believe Sydney was part of, was
Yes.
on August 28th, 1963. So two full
Yeah.
years later. I
Yeah.
can't help but think how different the film it would have been if this film would have been made after the March
A
on
few years later,
Washington,
yeah.
right?
Right.
So the sense that I got from this film was that it wanted to touch upon those racial injustices, so the topics of racial injustices, but it didn't want to go overboard. And let me explain
Right.
that, right? I don't know if you guys caught this, but his name was third on the marquee, right? It was
Yeah.
Paul Newman was the
Paul Newman was first, yeah.
star. Then what's
Joanne Woodward?
7:45.
Diane Woodward?
Yes.
Yeah.
Joanne.
So Joanne
Joanne.
Woodward?
Yes.
Sorry, is that the name? Yeah,
Joanne.
and then it was Sidney. So he was third on the marquee.
Mhm.
Right.
And I couldn't help but notice also when it's these little subtle things about the film, right? Like whenever they were on stage, it was always Paul's character in front and Sidney always in the back. Like I noticed that.
Right.
So that was kind of
There's only one scene I can think of where Sidney Poitier was in the same framing as Paul Newman, and Sidney was in the forefront, and that's when he was leaving
Mm.
leaving the cafe and kind of leaving Ram with his kind of insecurities. I think that's a kind of a significant moment for his
Yeah.
characterization. So I kind of feel like I know that Sidney Poitier had a history of kind of making sure his characters got what they deserve as a characterization. So I wonder, because you bring up that good point that in like pretty much every scene, it's Paul Newman is more the focal point.
more prominently.
pushed for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. And even on the poster, I noticed, at least some that I looked up, it was like Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward, and I think they put Louis Armstrong
Mhm.
on the bottom.
I think we
I
actually,
think that's the one that we have.
yeah, if we go back here,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But his Sidney Poitier's name is there, but he's not there. He's not
Yeah.
pictured there.
I think that's
Oh, there
supposed
you
to
go.
be
You
him.
see,
Is that
yeah,
him?
he's third on the marquee.
Mhm.
Oh, it looks like Louis
Well,
Armstrong
it
to
doesn't
me.
look like, yeah, it looks like Louis Armstrong, but I know
Oh,
Sidney
nice.
Poitier's character did play
He
the
did play-
saxophone,
yeah, he
so
did.
maybe it's supposed to be kind
Maybe.
of like combining the two characters.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But that was just a kind of general sense that I got from the entire film, that it wanted to, like, I felt like it wanted to be kind of pioneering, but it didn't want to
Mhm.
go overboard for the time, if
Right.
that makes sense.
For certain, yeah,
Right.
because while we were doing research on the era and like what was happening kind of in the background, a lot of the like in the late 50s was when there was a lot of kind of like social justice was beginning to take shape. Like there wasn't anything strictly like, I wouldn't say notable, but like there wasn't any action driven instances that were really talked about, but it was there, it was in the culture, it was in the atmosphere. And I definitely think this film was aware of it and wanted to kind of, that's why I think Connie's kind of like battle mentality about it was kind of supposed to be representative of like, oh, we feel like people are preparing
Right.
kind of for like pushing forward and trying to make improvements and such.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that the atmosphere at that time very much fed into the way the film was kind of handling that dispute.
Yeah, I think they were trying to influence like the viewer,
Mhm.
like you said, to like kind of like prepare, or like even I felt like the message of Sidney Poitier going back home
Yeah.
with Connie, it was kind of like to inject hope almost, maybe like for like the American viewer,
Yeah.
to say like, look, like we have backup, you know, like he's joining us, so
Mhm.
like you don't have to be like afraid that you're on your own, like you know, and he represented that like in Hollywood,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
That's a good point. I never even considered that, but yeah, that's a very good point.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead. Go
well,
ahead.
I was
Sorry,
going to
go on.
I was going to say, like, as a kid growing up in the 60s, one of my favorite shows was called Julia, which starred Diane Carroll as a nurse whose husband died in Vietnam, and she was raising a boy by herself.
Hmm.
And I never really thought much about the race aspect of it, but I read recently that she was the first Black star of a like a sitcom type of show. And I thought that was interesting. And I wondered where it fit in against this film. And it was 5 years later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was the
It
name of the show again,
was
Deborah?
called Julia.
Julia.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
look it up.
I loved that show. It was a sitcom that was kind of, I'm not too sure. It was around the time, I think, of Courtship of Eddie's Father with Bill Bixby, and he was a single parent raising a boy. I liked both shows, but I remember particularly that because I thought that Diane Carroll was so pretty. And yeah, and what a characters, the different characters she's played over the years, including Dynasty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So was
it's
it?
interesting.
Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
sorry. I was saying it's interesting that you bring it up because she also won a Golden Globe for that. And I
Mhm.
remember watching both those shows way after. But yeah, she also won a Golden Globe for that.
For
So it
Julia?
was Julia, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I was gonna say also, we were gonna mention Poitier's films throughout history.
Yeah.
And he has a trilogy with In the Heat of the Night, They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, and The Organization.
Yeah.
And that was like the first trilogy for a Black lead actor.
Mhm.
And I just thought how like impactful that was for all the upcoming actors like Will Smith,
Denzel Washington.
Denzel Washington. Like he did
Where's Billy Dean?
what was it, The Equalizer?
Equalizer.
Yeah, The Equalizer. Yeah, just like a lot of especially like two actors usually would be like the lead roles in like an action crime series.
Mhm.
I feel like that became popular, and I think that's because
Because he
Poitier, yeah, he popularized that.
Mhm.
So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Breaking down.
To those of you who are interested, TCM, if you get cable, is doing Sidney Poitier on Saturday night. There, like I think there's about 4 or 5 films that he's in,
Oh, wow.
including you know, In the Heat of the Night and The Defiant Ones, and which was
Yes.
actually before this film. And
Yeah.
A Warm December, which came much later.
Oh, I saw Warm December. Wasn't that? Oh, that was good. What was her name? Cicely Tyson, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, Jerry, can you repeat TCM Turner Classic Movies?
Yeah, this Saturday evening
This Saturday evening?
at 8 o'clock, they're doing In the Heat of the Night, and like they typically do, they focus on one actor over a series of films,
Mhm.
and
With commentary.
With commentary, yeah. The Defiant Ones falls after. That's the one he did with Tony Curtis. This was actually 1958, so this was before this film that we're looking at now. A Warm December, Cry the Beloved Country, 1952. He was in. It was a very early role.
When was
Yeah.
December? And is it
That's the second one, right?
I think so.
Yeah, and we wanted to talk a little bit too about kind of how this film contrasted and compares to like kind of modern filmmaking, because we're both younger and we are more familiar with like more modern filmmaking within the last 20, 30 years. And like watching something from the 60s was like we've seen content from the 60s, and certain things kind of stood out to us about how they went about crafting the film and sort of telling the story of the film. For example, there were a lot of long pauses on people to create maybe drama or meaning, that we almost felt like a little forced, or maybe lingered a little bit too long, or felt a little unnecessary. And the way that the scenes were blocked or positioned also had a very kind of a back and forth kind of feeling to it that didn't feel as smooth as what we kind of are more familiar with in more modern filming. We also found like the editing timing was a bit, it felt awkward, but maybe just in comparison to the current sensibilities, especially like going back to like the longer pauses when like you might have an actor on screen who has delivered a line or is about to deliver a line. They have almost up to 1 or even 2 seconds of air time where they're not speaking, and we're just kind of left to kind of almost wait on them, compared to more modern filmmaking where it's like you get these very fast cuts and edits where you almost don't even have a full time to register what the character is saying, or even what they're feeling about what they're saying before we're looking at another image. And obviously like the black and white was another major part, but I think this film came out roughly around the time when film was beginning to transition into color. And this obviously plays back to what we mentioned earlier about how the filmmakers wanted to portray France, but a lot of the film did feel very romanticized and whimsical in the way that the characters acted, and the way that the environments kind of felt very busy and very full of life. Even one scene in particular that stood out to us about in this sort of whimsical, fantastical manner is the scene where Louis Armstrong comes to the cafe, and they have what is essentially like a dueling banjos,
like a battle, yeah,
interaction. And when thinking about it, it was very highly like spectacle. You know, it was meant to feel very like energetic and very like bombastic, and meant to kind of be like a big stamp on the film. And it felt kind of awkward to us because we're thinking more from like our modern sensibilities, where, you know, if this famous musician was coming to a cafe to kind of engage with another musician, it seems unusual that they would bring along like a large instrumental piece behind them and a crowd with them. You know, that almost felt like it might undermine the experience for both the musicians. So little things like that kind of struck us as odd. And
yeah, no, I did like that when that was exactly my frame of thought when I saw that scene. It's like it almost felt like it was an ad for Louis.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like because, you know, he's a musician, you know, to sort of sell records for
Mhm.
Louis.
Right.
That's kind of how it felt to me.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I could totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Also look at the poster for it. It was selling
Yeah.
Louis.
Yeah.
And
Actually, that's a good point.
yeah, actually, we love that scene with Louis. We thought that was the bee's knees of the film. It was so full of energy, as you say, and we just loved it, that it was the energy part. But we also thought that, yeah, a lot of the rest of the film really dragged. It could have used some better editing. I've seen a number of films with the director of Martin Ritt. One of them that you may know is Norma Ray. It did not suffer the same lags that this film did. You know, it's of course earlier in his career, but Martin Ritt is not a young man. If he's still with us, I'm not sure.
Born 1914.
Yeah. Okay, 1914. Yeah. So he was not even a young man when he did this.
no, yeah.
But yeah, anyway, we thought the Louis scene was just great.
As a
Yeah.
former trumpet player and a musician, Louis Armstrong is considered to be the Mozart of trumpet players. So for
Right.
me, it was wonderful that film clip captured his essence, his passion, his energy, his enjoyment of playing the instrument. So I think we
Right.
were very lucky that Martin Ritt chose to put that in that film.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's one of the very few captures we have of him really at the height of his musical career and craft. So
Right.
and I think the film captured that energy, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
what he brought to that instrument and so on. So that's
For
why
That
sure.
scene was definitely bombastic. I love that word, Chris, that you used, because it describes that scene perfectly. But to your earlier point, right, about the slow the slow scenes and the slow editing, I find that with a lot of classic films, though, like films back in the day. I remember reading an article a couple of years back, and then where it mentioned with modern filmmaking. And I think it's to do with people's attention spans. Like people have
Yeah.
much lower attention spans now. So there's that need for constant stimulation. So like every
Yeah.
3 to 5 seconds, you cut to another shot, and it just
Yeah.
makes the film just feel more dynamic and fast flowing, right?
Yeah.
But I
Right.
think people back then, it was a totally, and I agree with what you said. It was a totally different style of filmmaking,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it was reminiscent of the day. Like
Yeah.
For sure.
now that I think back on a lot of these films that I grew up with in the 70s, I'm aging myself, man. It was like that, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's to do with people's attention spans now. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that actually has to do with music videos.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Music
great
video.
point.
If you notice with music videos, there's the constant, like
Oh, yeah.
every
Yeah.
3 to 5
Jumping.
seconds. MTV. I think MTV
Yeah.
basically kind of pushed the world into that direction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
now
point.
TikTok, which is the
Now-
worst of it.
Yeah, exactly. TikTok videos are like what, 15 seconds or something? Or
The maximum, I think, right?
I try not to use it, so I don't know.
Yeah. No,
I
it's
wonder-
it's very interesting too, because we watched a few other Sidney Poitier movies, and we watched The Lilies in the Field.
Of the field, yeah.
And that one was in
63.
63. And even the difference between Paris Blues and Lilies of the Field, that 2-year difference, Lilies of the Field didn't feel as slow. Like
Yeah.
the pauses they didn't seem quite as long. The editing didn't seem quite as lingering.
Right.
And then we watched also In the Heat of the Night,
Yeah.
which was in 68 or 67.
So I want to say 7.
67.
67, yeah. So
wow,
like
Jerry, you're
4
like
years
a
later.
trivia man here.
And
I went to film school, remember?
Yeah.
yeah, and in the heat of the night, the timing was a little bit faster. Like it was still, compared to today's editing style and pacing, it was still slower, but you could clearly see like a slight, like the shift towards being like a faster, less lingering kind of editing style.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were wondering if like the slowness was due to its adaptation from a novel, because Paris Blues was a novel and Lilies of the Field was a novel.
Also, no, yeah.
Yeah, so we were wondering, but then I feel like the more it got pushed into like modernity, it's a bit less adaptations of
Mhm.
novels.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, because I would think. and this
I
is-
thought, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No,
Go
please
ahead,
go ahead.
Rivette. Go ahead.
No, I thought it had to do maybe with the location because I think the location of Paris, this is, I think, mainly American audiences, and maybe it is also to showcase the lifestyle in Paris being
Right.
what we think, right, is more leisurely. You're going to go on vacation to Paris, we don't
Mhm.
really think of it as, like it wasn't for the French person who's working there, I would assume.
Right.
And I think I didn't find the pacing problematic. I loved it because it was a nice leisurely movie.
Yeah.
And I think also maybe to contrast the fact that it is a movie about music and about jazz and
Right.
showcasing the jazz musicians. So maybe to create that contrast where that
Mhm.
scene I believe it was bombastic, because I think in comparison to the
Right.
rest of the film, it actually adds that extra punch. I also didn't find it, I guess, because I used to watch a lot of Bollywood movies, and they used to have what are known as item numbers. So the music has nothing to do with the film. It is really to showcase a new artist, a new lyricist, a new musician, a new band, and they just insert it. So it doesn't always, it's somewhat really, it lends something to the movie, but it has nothing to do with maybe the characters and stuff. And I wonder if this was supposed to be that draw for people who were fans of Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and just jazz music generally to the American audiences in the 1960s, probably making it a bit more mainstream.
That's a good point. Yeah,
that's a really good point.
Yeah, I definitely think that what you're touching on regarding kind of making Paris appealing to an American audience, I think that definitely there's definitely that in there, because like you said, like you're kind of allowed to feel the space, you know. I keep thinking back to the scene where they're in front of the Notre Dame, where it was like a very broad shot where you could see a good portion of the Notre Dame in the background, and it was a very long kind of winding conversation, and I think there was only like one or two cuts in that whole scene, and that very much felt like it was like they're almost like saying like, look how lovely it is to be in this space, to have this sort of freedom of discussion, and to be able to be in this kind of in this space, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we were gonna ask if you preferred like the 1960s like filmmaking versus like modern day filmmaking, or like would you take kind of like certain parts of each and kind of put it together to make your like ideal filmmaking?
Well, if faced with the old style of a little bit slower pace and some really good, thoughtful messages, thought-provoking things, I'll take that any day over an action film. Thank you very much. I'm not too into explosions. I'd rather have an explosion of Louis.
Yeah.
And I think the heavy reliance on special effects, and you don't really get the character development, you don't get the chance to see the actor's range, and so, but I think there is place for everything. There are some nights you just want mindless movie of explosions, and sometimes you're looking for depth, right? I fully appreciate that, but I think there were a lot of other movies in the 60s. Like I remember watching Once More with Feeling. It has Yul Brynner. It's about, he's a symphony conductor, and it's all about music, and it is bombastic, and he's bombastic, and it's just a great movie, and it moves fast, but I think there was a little bit of everything. And to the earlier point of what was said regarding the attention spans, I know Alfred Hitchcock's most famous line was, you want to make the length of the movie equivalent to the human bladder. So you can't have, because you like, that's, I think there was something to that effect, that you don't want your audiences to have to be like rushing to the bathroom and they miss scenes. So that is what a length of the movie should be.
That's the intermission in Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah,
that's true.
Jerry will appreciate what I'm going to say with regards to camera techniques, right? We also have to remember, we have to put things into perspective, right? Back in the 60s, filmmaking has progressed, right? Like in the 30, 40 years since then. Now you have, techniques like whip zooms and focus pulling and stuff like that. Back then, I mean, those movies didn't have any of that. They just basically, whatever, the lens was set to like f 5.6, everything is in focus, you don't have blurry, bokeh backgrounds or any of that sort of stuff. So it was a much different style of filmmaking. Compared to today. But
a lot of those shots there, they were location shots, which would have been very unusual even in the 50s. A lot of it was still studio driven and set driven and so on. And so some of those shots would have been a bit of a challenge, beach shots.
Like the Notre Dame shot, right? I mean, that could have easily been done in a studio.
Oh yeah. What's actually funny, Jerry, that you mentioned that near the beginning of the film, I noticed as we were watching it the first time we're introduced to the cafe, and we're kind of given a street view of the cafe, and we see kind of like the street life, and then we're brought into the cafe. I noticed right away that there was like the background was a painting. Like it wasn't actually an on like an on location shot, and I thought like, oh, that's interesting. Like they did film in Paris, and they have a whole bunch of these kind of on location scenes and shots, and like why would they, like was it budgetary, was it limitations on the camera move that they were doing? Because I think that scene was one of the more complicated for the time camera movements. They started up very high and they came down very low, and they pushed in and moved. That was a lot of motion for a single take. I thought maybe there was a limitation of what they could do on location versus what they could put together in a set.
Right, for sure. And I think as SKN knows, because I know he's done this, that the external location shots are much more easily done today with just the technical things that are available now to get a quality
drones.
picture.
you don't even need cranes or jibs anymore. It's just shoot it with a drone.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
to try and eliminate external sounds and things like the things that we don't even worry about today.
Exactly.
I want to come back to the black and white though. You mentioned that by 1960 you're into an era where there's a decision to be made, whether it's black and white or color. Color had been around for 10 years now. If you look back, all of those classic Marilyn Monroe films and so on were all done in brilliant color, the 1940s and 50s. So by the time you get to 1960, I think it's a choice that the director is clearly making to move away from a color film, especially when doing Paris. I would have thought that you'd have chose color, to try and, if this is one of those highlight films where you're trying to introduce music and Paris and all that, it would be done so much more in color in the 1960s. It's still quite a novelty, but still accepted more readily. I just was curious why the director chose to go to the black and white, for what reasons?
Yeah, I thought about that too. And because I was, when I was thinking about like when did color first begin, I think it was in 46 or 47 with the first I think it was the first theatrical release of Snow White. I believe.
What about the Wizard of Oz?
Maybe it was the Wizard of Oz.
39.
39.
Oh, that was 39. Okay, yeah. So even further back. And I thought it was a curious decision, like you said, Jerry. Like that's a great opportunity to showcase like the color, and even I was trying to figure out like why, like could it play a role thematically?
I think so. And actually, when I think of jazz music, and particularly when I think of jazz music in a club, I think of like dark, gritty, smoke-filled, low, very dimly lit sort of scenes. And I think it was probably a stylistic choice, right? And the other thing that I'm thinking, it could also be maybe, I mean, this is just a thought, to sort of de-emphasize the romanticization of Paris, right? Because if the film would have been shot in, in color, and then you see, Paris in all of its beautiful glory, maybe this film was kind of designed in such a way that, well, Paris is not as romantic as we think it is. Could that be? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out as food for thought.
Or is it so that Paris wouldn't upstage the story itself?
That could be as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that, like, I feel like nowadays watching a black and white film feels like it's romanticizing it, but then back then I'm not sure if that was the same like intention, or that would have the same effect. Was it romanticizing or was it de-romanticizing?
Yeah, especially at the time when you're, like Jerry was saying, you have like that decision you're making if you decide to do black and white over color.
Right.
For the first 5 minutes of the film, Deborah and I were trying to figure out when it was set, because like I said, there was that studio shot coming with the camera coming down onto the street scene, and we were looking at the cars, because that's how we tell cars and the fashion, right?
Yeah.
And we swore it was the 1920s. And then as the characters started to show themselves, we're realizing, oh, they're actually in 60s clothes, and then the cars,
hairstyles.
the first thing we noticed was the taxi pulled up, and we said, well, that's not a 1920s car. And so it was really hard for us in the first act to sort of place when where, you know, what
When
the
it was
setting,
set.
when it was set,
Mhm.
Yeah.
until some more
Yeah.
clues came along.
I swear there was like some old Model Ts or something, like really old cars in that very beginning. And yet, you know, we suddenly realized, oh, it's got to be the 60s because look at the
Yeah.
hairstyles and, you know, they're dressed for the 60s.
That's
Yeah.
true.
I
Yeah.
gotta go
Or-
back and look at that beginning shot because
Me too.
Yeah.
but actually, so what I wanted to bring up, so like nowadays it's considered cliche to shoot or put out a movie in black and white, right?
Oh,
We
Oh,
often
yeah.
hear that it's cliche.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys have seen this movie. It's called Belfast. It's
Belfast.
I've heard of it.
it's
I
a
don't know if I
recent
have.
movie that was with Kenneth Branagh directed it.
Mhm.
And it
Oh,
was
yeah.
to do with the whole conflict. I think it also took place in the 1960s, Northern Ireland, right? So I think the choice of black and white for that particular film was not only, you know, to sort of bring us back in time, right? You know, because it was the 60s, but also, you know, it adds a certain tone, sort of like that underlying tone to the film that you know, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in Northern Ireland back in those days. And now that I think back at that film, because I just saw it like 3 weeks ago, had it been released in color, I don't think it would have had the same effect.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think for modern day filmmakers, you know, despite the fact that we often hear, you know, that black and white films, you know, in modern times is quote unquote cliche, I still think there's a lot of good sort of use cases for it, but it really
Right.
depends on the story.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm
Well,
saying?
also when I see something in black and white, I also think of sort of the old newsreels too, which were in black and white.
Mhm.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
It's 8:15.
Also, there's some things that show up better in black and white too. I was noticing that as they filmed like in the cafe and they sort of spotlit different faces watching in the audience that they could
Yeah.
highlight. That's the person we're supposed to be paying attention to
Mhm.
see what the reaction is on her face or his face, whatever.
That's
Mhm.
true.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. But
It's a good point.
for me, I feel like I actually enjoy like the 60s filmmaking because sometimes I feel like modern filmmaking is too fast. Like it's too like I feel like our understanding of how our like psychology works, like we have a very like good understanding right now that I feel like with visuals and music and pacing, we know how to really like get people like hooked or like change our emotions like so quickly. But like sometimes like I don't want that. Like I just want to like relax and like experience something like a stroll, you know, like or almost like you're reading a novel, you know, it's more like I'm involved and I feel like I have to pay attention. Like it's more like interactive almost rather than like just like being there watching and like I don't know. I don't know if you get that.
Yeah, well,
but
Yeah,
a lot of the
totally.
modern stuff, you're really bombarded.
yeah,
constantly.
exactly. It's just like
In this you have, we had time to chat a little bit in between in the slower scenes and to absorb more and to think more on our own
Mhm.
rather than just absorbing.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's going back to the adaptation thing. I had the thought that I don't know how popular, how common adaptation from novels were around that era, but I know a lot of people in film kind of struggle with how do you adapt novels because it's a very different medium, and I would say that even today there's not really like a standard mode of approaching adapting a book or adapting a written piece into or like a novel into a film. And I had the thought that maybe a certain consideration was given to the time that you might spend with a character in their head in a novel, where you would get some insight into them, and maybe part of the decision behind their editing choices came into the idea of, oh, if we show what these characters processing, you know, on screen, that might translate how the characters are feeling more clearly, or we might translate what they're thinking more clearly for the audience to interpret or understand. And that was a thought I had, at least in regards to how it might function on a technical level, trying to adapt a novel at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that makes sense.
We want to continue? I mean,
Sure.
I feel like we're kind of running out of time here.
Yeah.
Yeah, how's the time? I thought the what do you call that thing? Like a gazebo where they were at? I was
Yeah.
fascinated with that scene because it looked kind of derelict, and yet I found that a very romantic location. And I was thinking about that yesterday, and I thought, had it been new, it wouldn't have been the same thing. Had it
No,
been
would have
new
been,
and painted white and pristine in a manicured garden, it wouldn't be the same. It made me think to one of my favorite places as a kid, which was an abandoned house. And we used to play in the garden and everything was overgrown. And we'd come home with some little flowers from mom and she'd go, "You've been in that abandoned house again?" I go, "Well, I only got one nail in my shoe and it went between my toes. So it wasn't dangerous. Don't go there again." But we'd sneak into the garden anyway. But it was a very special place because it was old and derelict. And I wondered, is that in Paris? How did they find that? I thought it was a very special thought, especially with the little old guy, the dog goes running up to them and the little old guy goes, "Woo!" And "Oh, continue, please."
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the Paris mindset, I'll call it. It's like everybody's happy, everybody's getting along, everybody's happy that everybody else is happy.
Yeah.
So let's stop being grumpy, guys.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I think if everybody could have a, "Hey, we're happy" mode in our minds, that it could be a better world. But I think everybody's looking for trouble in a lot of cases.
Yeah, you can kind of see that even in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Driven by conflict.
Yeah.
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 So we do
Um,
have 10 minutes left.
yeah.
So I don't know if you guys want to focus on a particular slide or a particular point.
What do you want to? How would you
Whatever
like
you
to handle the
wanna-
last 10 minutes?
I'll leave
Because
it to you guys.
we have some content regarding more regarding the film, and then we have some content about Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Sidney Poitier and his career and
Sure.
kind of how he came up and such?
Yes.
We'll skip through our Q&As that we were going to ask because we kind of went through a lot of it.
Them,
yeah. So when we were kind of researching the film and Sidney Poitier, we learned a lot about like his upbringing, his history, his career. He came from very I guess you can say humble beginnings, where he was actually born in Miami early and unexpected, and
Premature.
yeah, premature. And during the first few months of his life, like he wasn't expected to live.
Yeah.
And his parents devoted their time to try to make sure that he got what he would need while they were in Miami, rather than trying to risk going back to where they're from originally, which was the Bahamas. But they did eventually go back to the Bahamas with Sidney, and his family was I guess like they were very poor. They didn't have very much.
Yeah. They were tomato farmers.
Yeah.
They didn't have access to electricity, running water. They didn't have like a mirror in their home.
Yeah.
His mother would crush like gravel, like
Yeah.
rocks into gravel so that they could sell it
Yeah.
to earn some income.
Yeah, because even like his father, he worked 2 different jobs, and one of them was farming, and one was driving a taxi in another island, like not even on the island they lived on. Yeah, and it's one of the things that we saw a lot or read a lot about Sidney was that he considered those early years, as he lived in the Bahamas until he was 14.
Yeah.
And he considered those formative years to be very important for his self-identification and how he understood himself within the larger context of the world.
Yes.
he didn't have, because Cat Island is where his family lived. It was a very small island, and in his own words, there were two white people on the island, and there was no context for racial prejudice or any kind of conflict between different people on the island based on skin tone or anything.
Yeah.
And so when he finally did leave Cat Island at 14, or I think, was it 15 or 14?
He left at 15.
15.
Yeah.
He was surprised in Miami to find like a very different kind of very different environment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I believe he had a run with the KKK,
Mm-hmm.
and then he realized he couldn't pursue what he wanted there, so he moved to New York with only $3 in his pocket, and he came across an advertisement for auditioning for the American Negro Theater, and he went there and auditioned, but he fumbled his lines and he had a thick Caribbean accent, and the director told him, like, you're wasting your time, just like go be a dishwasher. So he went and he became a dishwasher, but at the restaurant that he worked, he got help from a server who helped him learn to read through newspapers, and at the same time he exchanged custodial duties for acting lessons, and he also listened to broadcasts of like to learn the American accent. And then I believe it was 7 years that passed, and then he went back to re-audition, and then he actually got cast in his first role, which was Days of Our Youth.
It was a leading role.
Yeah.
Yeah. He basically built himself into what he thought and what ended up being what he needed to be,
right,
to be accepted as an actor at the time.
Yeah.
And the development that he went through in order to achieve that, it led him into a space where at the time there was a lot of leftist activists in New York, and a lot of them trying to find social justice for the Black communities, and just through his interest in pursuing theater and pursuing acting, he became associated with those people by extension. And it's interesting when you look at his career, because let me just.
He actually got like blacklisted.
Yeah, like when he was in theater, he was blacklisted from certain productions, and even when he made the transition from theater into film with his first film being a breakthrough, that he was presented with a choice of whether he wanted to pursue theater or film, because he was meeting the same kind of resistance in film as he was in theater, where certain people would look at his associations and think that his extremist views might not play well with their productions or their films.
Right.
And ultimately, I think he recognized that maybe the film industry offered something in the form of people willing to take risks that allowed him to kind of continue his pursuits. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and it's funny, like how Chris just said, like his extremist views, which was just basically to be considered as like a human being.
Yeah.
But he also got criticism from like Black people in the US, for not being extreme enough.
Yeah.
Which is like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like understandable because of their frustrations over what they couldn't control, right? Like the civil unrest but it's understandable, but also unfair to Poitier, since he was like the man in the spotlight. It's easy to be like, well, you're not doing enough.
Yeah.
You know, you're the only one up there representing us, so you have to like burn down the city. But he acknowledges like the responsibility that he had to take on to represent Black people in mass media and film. Although he does say that it did take a toll on him, and he was criticized in a New York Times article by a Black journalist who said he was like pandering to whites. He was always playing the same roles. He's not doing enough, and that actually led to him moving back to the Bahamas, and he took a 10-year break from acting, and he was actually considering like not going back. but then he thought about it and he returned, but then that's when he had his debut in directing.
He transitioned to directing after his hiatus, which I thought was an interesting thing because like you can, if you look at his filmography, you can kind of see how his career kind of battled with the current social structures that were in place at the time. In the early 50s, even by association, he was viewed as being an extremist, like we mentioned earlier. And as time continued to progress, he was viewed as not doing enough to be in the position he was in. And I think the decision to move into directing was kind of his way of saying that what was important to him was his own form of expression. Because I think in a way he was kind of trying to what's the word, to capture what was important to him. Because as we mentioned earlier, in interviews he always wanted to be addressed and have discussions related to him as a person rather than him as a black activist or as a black actor or however the interviewers and reporters wanted to frame him. And I think his move into directing was kind of a way to try to continue with that effort, to be looked at as a creator, as an artist, before whatever the world was kind of trying to paint him as.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know we have 1 minute left, so I'm trying to really.
Yeah, no, we can go a couple of minutes over if you guys need to.
Yeah, if there's something
Okay.
you want to
No
talk about
worries.
specifically.
Well, I was just here. I got a quote from his interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2000. He says, "The big picture is that racism has been an awful experience, but there are other experiences. We need to keep an eye on the other human experiences to give ourselves the fullness and breadth of our own humanity. Our humanity is served back to us through the eyes of those who have the most us. And they serve back to us a view of ourselves that is incomplete. If we don't look to the bigger picture, our view will narrow to that which is constantly fed to us."
Mhm.
So I felt like that really captured his essence
Yeah.
as a person and what he stood for.
Yeah.
So after our brief discussion and overview of Poitier's rich contributions to American film and the hearts and minds of everyone who marveled at the charismatic man on the screen, we take a moment to reflect on the enormous responsibility Poitier chose to carry for all of us, paving the way for all humanity to rise above impending prejudices and honoring your sense of self and the values that you've cultivated throughout your life is the message that we received from a man who was so brilliantly courageous and led the way despite unjust criticisms on himself. So yeah, I'm just gonna say tonight we honor Sidney Poitier, and to honor him is to honor ourselves
Mhm.
and the humanity of all others. Yeah.
Amen.
Well said.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Are there any closing thoughts, Deborah, Jerry, Laura?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm.
And we actually found out that Oprah is actually working on a documentary
Mhm.
on Sidney Poitier, and it's going to be a production with Apple TV Plus. So I'm excited for that, and gonna wait to hear more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
because
Yeah.
they had a lot of
They had a-
exchanges.
Yeah. They had an intimate relationship.
Mhm.
See, now I need to go back and I need to watch a lot of his classic films, the
Mhm.
ones that he was I think, what was the name of it? Who's Coming to Dinner? Or
Yes.
Yes.
Who's
Yeah, I
coming
guess
to
who's
dinner?
coming
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
dinner.
I guess.
yeah, definitely
Yeah,
want
that
to
was-
see that movie.
That was
Yeah.
one we didn't watch, but we want to watch it.
Yeah.
I think it's actually on Netflix right now, right?
I think so, maybe. Or was it Amazon?
I think it was Netflix.
Or maybe Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can find that one on Netflix right now. But I want to see more of his early works, like in the 50s, to see
Yeah.
kind of how that contrasts with because we watched mostly his works in the 60s. So I'm curious to see
To see the
how-
transition
His
Yeah,
progression.
that he
Yeah.
exactly.
did. Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Also
be
his
curious as
directorial.
well, because in the 1950s, you're coming out of the studio system, and he sort of begins his career as that's ending. I would, because so there definitely was a
Right.
crossover,
Yeah.
say,
Right.
So I'd be curious to know that how he managed to get himself into the system,
Yeah.
True.
and then as it evolved away, he sort of then was able to sort of build on, more independent filmmaking, outside of the studio system.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also interested in seeing the films that he directed, just to
Yeah.
like compare and contrast, like maybe like things he probably took from his experience, but then injected like something
Of his own.
of his own to further progress film.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to see how his contributions may tie into like modern filmmaking and sensibilities and such. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, well, on
Thank
that
you.
note,
Yeah.
I think we'll call it an evening. I just want to thank both you, Romina and Chris. You guys did a phenomenal job tonight to host
Thank
you.
this
you.
wonderful event.
You helped.
Yeah.
All of you helped.
But I just want to thank you guys so much, and thank you, Jerry, thank you, Deborah, thank you, Laura, and all the attendees. And yeah, that's it. I think
Awesome.
all
Great.
Thank you
That's
so
the
much.
next one.
Thank you.
What's the next one, K-Hat?
So we're hoping to do more of these film clubs this year. Well, if anyone has any suggestion to
Diane Carroll? Oh.
yeah, the one thing that I do want to mention, for any type of film club we do, it should be a film that is accessible on one of our library apps. So
Good
the
point, yeah.
reason, the reason we're doing Paris Blues is because this was the only film that was actually available on Hoopla, on Canopy, which we have access to. So
Right.
just keep that in mind. If you guys ever want to recommend a film club, we could definitely do another one. Just shoot me an email, shoot Shaheen an email, and yeah, just keep in mind that it should be a film that's available on one of the library apps.
For sure.
Great.
We'll take a look.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from. Absolutely. Yeah.
And don't forget TCM Saturday.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
Yeah.
I wrote it
Yeah.
down. I gotta
Okay.
see if my cable package actually includes it. I think it does.
Uh-oh.
Anyways, thank you everyone, and
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
All right.
Have a good night.
Yeah.